under the agenda, under current practices, we've had 3 questions so far, and they're all related to evictions and orders. So the first question that we have is that so this person says that we received a couple of orders that must be enforced before the end of June. If we are unable to proceed with evictions by this date, will that date be extended?
So I'll answer this as Michelle Corbel. So as long as you have an order from our office already, that's an order of possession granted, you would have to take that order into the court to obtain your writ of possession prior to the enforcement date. And it would be up to the sheriffs about whether they're going to enforce the order now or the writ now, or if they're going to wait on the writ. I don't know if a writ of possession actually has an expiry date once you've obtained it. That's the information that you would have to obtain from the sheriff's office. But as far as our orders are concerned, as long as you have gone to the court with that granted order of possession prior to the enforcement date and obtained your writ, then that order should still be able to be enforced, either now or at a later date, depending on the sheriff.
Okay, thank you. I think that question was from Lauren. So Lauren, I don't know if your sound is working yet, or if you have any follow-up questions, or if you want to write anything in the chat box. Continue on. The next question was that Premier Pallister stated there would be exemptions to the eviction postponement in matters where tenant safety is at risk. Is there a special RTB contact for these matters?
Hi, it's Michelle Reynolds. No, any landlord who wishes to apply for an order of possession for those reasons can call our general information line and make an appointment to come in and bring in their paperwork and get their packages ready and a hearing date.
Great, so that's very straightforward. And then the last question about current practices, before we'll open it up to see if others have any, is the person who asked this is with Bethania, and they're not here, so I don't know if there will be follow-up, but they said that there's a tenant who doesn't keep their place in the order specified in the lease. Additionally, they are a hoarder who has had warnings from the fire department to inspections. They had previously reached a mediated settlement, but the former landlord never followed up with the eviction. They have refused all spraying for bugs and are never prepared. Can we still evict if we have all of the documentation, even though there are restrictions in place?
So are these ongoing issues or issues that happened in the past with the former landlord?
And is the mediated agreement already expired?
I believe that this is a building that they probably took over management of. So it's the same building, but a same unit, same tenant, but a different landlord, if that makes sense. So that's where they talk about the previous landlord never followed up with the eviction. So they would have had an eviction order or a mediated settlement.
But I guess my question is, are these issues still ongoing, or are they issues that have, are they still continuing?
Yes, as far as I know, I think I spoke with Paul about this. It's so the person is continuing to hoard, and they're concerned about the safety related and potentially fire safety related to them continuing to hoard.
So if the mediated agreement that was completed by the former landlord has expired, then the landlord can't do anything at this point to request an order based on that particular mediated agreement. That doesn't mean that they can't proceed with an eviction for what's going on currently. So in order for them to be successful or to be able to terminate right now, they would have to be able to show that the actions of the tenant are causing an immediate risk to the health or safety of other people. So I think that would be something from the fire department, if the fire department is saying that this person's hoarding is causing an immediate risk to the health or safety, then that is a termination that they can proceed with right now. If it's not an immediate risk, it doesn't mean that they can't start with warning letters, which would be required. You know, the tenant has to comply with the spraying, the tenant has to clean up the hoarding. They just wouldn't be able to issue a termination notice at this point until the suspension has been lifted.
Okay, that makes sense. Are there other questions from anyone about the current practices, either about evictions and orders or about rent increases? I don't see any questions. Giving you one more minute if anyone wants to type anything in or raise your hand. Doesn't look like anyone's sort of waving to say they have anything. Okay. So I think a lot of the questions or the more complicated questions might relate to the anticipated plans and changes. Anticipated changes and plans. So the first question is around evictions and orders again. Do you have any information about when the eviction hearing freeze might end? Do you expect it to be May 31st or later? And can you tell us what the process is going to look like once that ends?
Okay, so just starting with the first part of that question, there's really two issues here. The termination notices themselves that have been suspended are done through amendments of the Residential Tenancies Act. So those amendments, other than being able to terminate for impairment of safety or unlawful activity, are in effect until that amendment has been repealed. There is no date for that at this time. So you cannot terminate for anything other than unlawful activity or impairment of safety from March 24th forward until that amendment has been repealed. Now, on the other part of that is the suspension of hearings. The suspension of hearings is done through an Emergency Measures Act order, and that suspension ends on June 30th. So if there was a termination notice that was given prior to March 24th for any other reason, you can proceed with that as of July 1st. If it's for a termination notice other than unlawful activity or impairment of safety that has been given after March 24th, you cannot proceed on that. So it's a little bit confusing, but any termination notice that were given prior to March 24th can be acted upon. You can proceed with an order of possession hearing as of July 1st, if that makes sense to you.
That does make sense. So the July 1st is for anything prior. Any new hearings or eviction notices cannot be in place until the order is lifted. Do you have any sense of, or have you heard anything about what that lifting might be, when it might be?
We haven't, and that's not actually an order. So that particular thing is the amendment of the act, right? And so until that 9.2, I think it was Bill 58, I believe, and you can look at that through. If you go to our website, you can see a link to that, the amendment of the act, and you can see what it includes. So it's including the rent freeze, it's including the no termination notices other than impairment of safety or unlawful activity, and also no rent, no late fees. That's done through an amendment. So until that's repealed, and we haven't heard the date that that'll be repealed, so I can't guess or offer you any information on that. The hearings themselves, though, the suspension is being lifted as of July 1st.
And so once the hearing freeze ends, so for anything that was in place before March 24th, will there be any changes to the process, or do you expect a significant backlog of cases?
So I think what we're going to try to do, and it'll depend, because we had a lot of hearings that order of possessions that had been scheduled for non-payment of rent, for instance, and we had to postpone those. So I think what will happen, and we haven't, this isn't set in stone or anything, but what I think our intention is going to be is to, for the first month after the suspension, so in July, we'll most likely just be holding only order of possession hearings and not holding claims, because those are not as urgent. I think so it'll probably be a month, maybe a month and a half of trying to get through the backlog, and it probably shouldn't take longer than that, I wouldn't think, to get through the backlog, and then it would be, I would think, business as usual after that. Because we can certainly hold a lot of order of possession hearings that are for rent, and that we can hold a lot more of those. We'll also have the ability to mediate a lot of those, because our mediation has also been suspended right now.
Great. Are there any questions from folks related to that?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Jen.
Just, are you, I know you say that it should take about a month and business as usual. Are you doing any ramping up with staff in order to be able to probably deal with the significant amount of backlog that's going to be taking place?
No, we have 6 full-time hearing officers that will be taking hearings, and those are the people who would be required to take the hearings, and those are the people who are trained to take the hearings. So I don't believe that there will be any other staff brought in to do that. We'll see how it goes, though. We do have other people who are trained in other roles right now who could potentially be pulled into the docket if need be, but that'll be on we'll have to play that by ear and see where we're at.
And would that be similar for mediated agreements? Do you anticipate there being a challenge with or a backlog related to developing those agreements?
Go ahead, Michelle.
I mean, all of the client services officers do mediated agreements for non-payment of rent plans, like payment plans. And I don't see that, I'm sure there'll be a lot for the first few weeks, but I don't know that it would be substantially more than what they would typically handle in a week at a time.
Right. And so we've got the 13 client service officers who work out of the Winnipeg office, as well as 2 full-time mediation officers. So between the 15 people, we should be able to manage to get through the mediation. But we do have other staff in the office who could potentially be pulled in for that as well. So we'll just, again, look at volumes and determine staffing accordingly.
So there was a question about, I guess this would be post, once the bill, once the amendment is repealed. But the other question on evictions and orders is, when this is over, what will RTB consider a reasonable time frame for tenants who had to make a repayment agreement with their landlord to repay before eviction would be considered?
I don't think that that there is a reasonable time frame. I mean, at the end, so terminations were suspended or frozen, but that doesn't mean that tenants weren't supposed to pay their rent. So as far as we're concerned, tenants should, this time of non-eviction was to give tenants an opportunity to get their finances in order and to make these arrangements with their landlords. Once the termination suspension has been repealed, then I believe a landlord should be able to come into the branch the very next day and issue a termination notice if that's what they choose to do. I mean, it's entirely up to the landlord to determine what they feel is reasonable or not, based on the fact that tenants should have been paying their rent all along.
Are there any questions from folks related to that? So those are all the questions we have in advance on sort of anticipated changes in plans related to evictions and orders.
I have a question. It's Michelle Meaches, Winnipeg Housing.
Great, go ahead, Michelle.
I just have a question for if we had a previous mediated agreement in place and it's been breached, can we send that in ahead of time to have it certified? Like get in the queue?
Do you mean like send it in anticipation of the July 1st? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, like to have it certified, yes, if we send it in. Or do we have to wait till it's all open?
Was it breached during this termination freeze?
Or was it breached before 24th?
Just prior to, like we were going to file, but then everything closed down.
So I think you can send, I mean, there's nothing stopping you from sending it in. Just understand that we can't issue an order until the suspension of the hearings has been issued. I mean, so you can certainly send it in now. Just understand that you're not going to get an order until, the first week of July.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions on evictions and orders now or
I have one, Chris. It's Lori.
Go ahead, Lori.
So I'm just trying to understand. So if you have a tenant that hasn't paid rent for April, May, June, then you can send in a Form 8 or a termination, say for July 1st, but technically you wouldn't have a hearing till August because you're dealing with the backlog in July.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you also, that's assuming that the act changes have been repealed and you're able to give that notice of termination.
Right.
So basically somebody would could be April, May, June, July, 5 months without paying rent till you can actually do anything with them.
You can't terminate right now until the amendments of the act have been repealed. So whenever that happens, if the tenant has not paid their rent or made arrangements to pay their rent, then you can terminate at that point. You can't terminate before that.
Right. I'm just thinking for the nonprofits, it's just, that's a long time for somebody to be sitting not paying rent. And how do you no action on it, which is tough.
That's understandable, but this is the amendment, and this is the decisions of government, and so there's nothing that we can do about that. But this is not supposed to be a rent holiday for tenants, right? Tenants are still supposed to be paying their rent. The intent was never for tenants to not pay their rent. That was not the intent of the terminations. It was an opportunity to give tenants time, tenants who have been financially affected by the COVID, time to get their finances together so that they could continue to reside in their rental units. It was never, and it's not intended for tenants to just stop paying their rent. And I understand that some are doing that, but that was not the intention of this change.
Yeah. No, I understand. I was just trying to get a timeline of if they're, and most tenants have been pretty good in trying to make some arrangements or do stuff, but you do have the odd one that may try to figure out how to make this a bit of a holiday. So, okay.
Yeah.
So that's a good lead into the last question that folks sent in advance, which is about rent increases. So the question was, with COVID-19, how long will we not be able to increase rent? And it's my understanding that from this conversation that it will be not until the amendment is repealed. Is that with the added expenses, what do you anticipate the percentage change increase coming for this year? I don't know if you're the ones that make that decision or if that's a political decision, but if there's anything that you could say about anticipated rent increases this year?
The rent increase, the annual rent increase guideline is set using a formula that you can find on our website, actually, and it has to do with the consumer price index So if you go into rent increases on our website, you should find the link to the formula on how that's figured out, and the link also to the Consumer Price Index, where you can go and get a feel for what the changes in the CPI have been. And that's how the rent increase guideline is set, using those numbers.
Oh, I see. So that was for this at, I think, 2 point something. So the once the amendment is repealed, then folks would be able to increase rent by the amount that was already announced. Like there won't be any sort of backdating or anything like that related to the increase.
So what landlords should be doing is, even though there's a rent increase freeze right now, they should still be giving the tenant the notice of rent increase if a rent increase anniversary date is now, right? So the notice should still be given. Once the freeze has been repealed, then the tenant would be required to pay the increased amount, provided the landlord gave the proper notice. So you're still able to protect your anniversary date. You're still able to give your notices of rent increase. You just can't collect on the increase until the amount has been repealed. So if landlords were supposed to have an increase in May, they should have given their notice 3 months prior to that. And then once it's repealed, then they could start collecting that. They won't be able to collect on an increase that was supposed to take effect during the freeze. They won't be able to collect back pay, but they can collect starting going forward.
That makes sense. I see Lawrence ask a question about the RGI rent increases for tenants. I don't know if you can speak to that or if that's set by Manitoba Housing.
So you're talking about the subsidized rent?
Yes.
Yeah, that's not set by us, and we can't comment on that. That would be Manitoba Housing, and although it's an increase, I don't believe that they can take it. Can they? So I'm not sure. They would have to. All we can really tell you is that rent increases done through the RTA are frozen. I'm not sure about increases through subsidies. You might want to check with housing, Manitoba Housing, Lawrence, on that.
My sense from talking.
Pardon me?
My sense from talking with them just after this announcement was that they'll sort of follow what they'll follow and be quite similar to whatever you do. So I think they'll make that decision when they're able to, and it will be pretty similar to what RTB is doing as well. Those are all our questions. Oh, I see another question from Joanne. What about rent increases through landlord discounts?
So through the removal of a discount?
Yes.
The removal of a discount isn't considered a rent increase as far as the legislation is concerned. So, but a discount can't be removed if it's during a fixed term and there's no condition. So if a term is up and you're offering a renewal to a tenant, you have the right to remove that discount, and it's not considered a rent increase. So you should still be able to do that.
I saw Joanne gave a thumbs up, so that answered her question. Does anyone else have questions?
It's Lori. I have another question. Is there, I guess, when the hearings start, do you have any idea what, I guess, different for social distancing, or if a tenant can only come by themselves, or is there anything that you will have that will be different for hearings?
Well, it depends on where we're at in the pandemic. We're doing a lot of hearings now by teleconference. But we do have social distancing set in our hearing rooms, but there will be a limit on the amount of people who can be in a hearing room at one time if we're looking at social distancing. So it'll all depend on where we're at with respect to that. So we should be able to accommodate, even if we have to stagger our dockets. If you're familiar with our dockets right now, we have a docket at 9 a.m. and one at 1:30. But in order to accommodate, we may be having to have a docket at 9, a docket at 10, a docket at 11, and that type of thing. And we're able to do that. So we should be able to maintain the social distancing requirements and the safety of our staff and the safety of the public as well.
Excellent. Any other questions? Give folks a couple of minutes. We got through all of the advanced questions faster than I thought we would. This is it's great. It's really good information. I think it's relatively straightforward, but it makes a big difference to be able to hear it from you versus reading it or sort of reading through information to try to figure out the exact answer that folks are looking for.
Yeah, and it also helps to have the questions beforehand so that we can, have the information here for you. That's worked well.
Yes, great. I see, Joanne asked a question about laundry increases. Can we apply for laundry cost increases?
You can you can still apply for your above guideline increases. So we're still, rent regulation is still working on, like they're still issuing orders, setting rents. It's a laundry increase for an outside, like a third party laundry, or is this a laundry increase that would be considered like the landlord's laundry cost? Because if it is, then I believe that that's going to be still part of the freeze, but I would actually have to check on that because I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, yeah, it is. Joanne said that it is a landlord laundry, so it's not a third party.
So I can definitely check on that and I can provide you with a better response. But if you are looking to do an increase in laundry, I mean, you can still go through with your application right now because we're still processing applications and above guideline increases. And I will get an answer for you whether you can actually increase the laundry right now during the freeze. But don't not go through with your application if you have one to put forward.
Not seeing any other questions from folks. I know so we had a conversation, our board had a conversation about different issues or challenges people were facing, and people were wondering to what extent you would be backlogged or maybe limited in your ability to fulfill the demand after this. And that sort of relates to Lori's question about, 5 months of someone not paying rent. We don't know to what extent that's happening. It seems to be minimal for now, and hopefully that will remain the same. But if there becomes a time that we can support you in any way as the public, raising issues or challenges so that you're having the resources or information that you need to be able to fulfill the timelines and support the processes, don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know. I think we all want to work together to avoid evictions wherever possible and avoid tenants getting in a position where they owe 6 months worth of rent that they'll never be able to repay, and the landlord can't recoup those losses. So at any time, if you're seeing issues that we can advocate on, don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not Not seeing any more questions here. Oh, I see Chris. Chris asked, are there any generalized examples of types of exemptions that would proceed on the eviction front?
Sorry, can you explain the question again?
Yeah, Chris, I don't know if you're able to, I think your sound typically works.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, I know reading the government a few weeks ago that Premier Pallister said if there's any evictions that were still pertaining to safety, that they still might proceed. I was just wondering if there's any kind of generalized examples of that you could kind of explain so maybe landlords can know what to watch out for.
Well, we can still proceed with hearings for an immediate impairment of safety or illegal activity that's causing an immediate impairment of safety. So, I mean, an immediate impairment of safety.
It could be anything from taking down a smoke detector, because that is an immediate impairment of safety, to assault, threats, anything like that that would justify a landlord giving a notice that would be a 5-day notice without a warning. So if something occurs that could cause an immediate risk to the health or safety of the landlord or other people in the complex, or the unlawful activity is a safety concern, for instance, drug dealing, methamphetamines, needles, stuff like that, then a landlord can pursue those notices.
What about like intentionally disregarding COVID-19 precautions that have been set out?
What is it?
Disregarding COVID-19.
Yeah, so if people are not social distancing or are having, I think if they're not staying away from other tenants in the building.
I think you'd have to have, I mean, if you're thinking that it's an immediate risk to the health or safety, I think you would have to proceed first through the health department, and they would have to determine whether somebody is breaching their orders. And then if it's hard to answer that question, because if a person does not have the virus, then they're not causing a risk. It's not an immediate risk to the health or safety if they're within, not maintaining the social distancing. So I think you would have to have, in order to be successful with that type of hearing, you would have to have some sort of documentation from health as well as evidence to present at a hearing, if that answers the question.
It does. We had a few calls with members about, we sort of called it Ask Each Other Anything, so people could ask what other people were doing so that we could learn from each other. And one of the biggest, most common questions that came up was, what are people doing about sort of trying to keep people out of common rooms, keeping people from gathering, keeping people from having a bunch of guests over, those sorts of things. So I understand that there are there's maybe a different perception of what is safe and healthy at this time compared to other times. So I think people have been relatively creative and haven't had, although it's challenging, haven't had major safety issues related to it. But it sounds like the first stop when there are issues like that is to contact public health.
Right, and they have enforcement officers out right now who are issuing warnings and issuing fines if necessary. So I believe that would be the first step that somebody should take prior to going ahead with a termination notice.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Any other questions from folks? Chris gave a thumbs up, so it looks like you answered his question.
I have a question. It's James here from Winnipeg Housing. What was that? What was the act where the amendment was held? What was the act number or the bill?
I believe it's Bill 58. So if you go to our website, at the very top of our website, there's a banner with COVID information. If you click on that, you'll see that we actually have the link to the bill there.
Okay.
And it would be, I believe it's section 9.2 has been added to, or part 9.2 has been added to the act that is the amendment, but it is Bill 58, and you can find it there.
Okay, I don't see it as Bill 58 because that's different when I go onto the province.
Hang on, I'll sign onto my computer here and let me just.
So are you in the RTB site?
Yes.
Manitoba.ca/RTB, and then you see the COVID, click here.
I do not have COVID here, so I'm probably in the wrong site.
Yeah, so the site should say residential tenancies branch, and then it should say due to COVID-19, current service level changes. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do now. Okay.
I think, James, C put it into the chat box
Right.
here.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Okay, that's all I need to know.
So then if you click on where it says click here, you've got Bill 58, the Residential Tenancies Amendment Act. If you open that, you'll see the amendments.
Right. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
Christine, it's Lori. I just had another comment for a minute. So
Yep.
what Christina said, Michelle and Michelle, is that to keep the dialogue open. I know that that you have a good relationship with the PPMA, and the information flows back and forth. So I guess from our association, because of maybe a little bit different with our nonprofits, they're either subsidized or, like I said, some people will use the system. If we were to go out to our members and we find that coming into July that maybe there's, lots of people have a lot of arrears or things that they need to deal with the RTB, is that something that we can provide beforehand, just more so what's coming down from the nonprofit sector as far as the needs of the RTB, so you can plan appropriately?
Absolutely. Any information that you can provide that would help us to plan would be great.
Okay. Yeah, because I think it's important I guess that's kind of our concern as an association, is if we're left with tenants with higher arrears in some of the smaller providers, how quickly can we get resolve to that, and that you're not backlogged to the point that we're waiting months and months for hearings, but that what's kind of where our situation is. And I know that Christine does talk to the PPMA too, but again, our providers are a little different than the PPMA because of being in the nonprofit sector, which has its own challenges.
Yeah, so any information that you can provide us that can help with our staffing planning for the reopening of hearings would be very welcome.
Okay.
That's great. We've been doing surveys of members to hear what their issues are, so we can do a survey maybe at the end of May to get a handle on or a sense of what's happening in the sector, and we can send you those results.
Yeah, that would be good.
I don't see any other hands up or questions. So I think folks got things answered for now. And yeah, this was really wonderful. I hope we can keep the dialogue open. We'll definitely share any concerns or issues that people are raising coming up, or as things are lifted or changed, things that our members are anticipating, we can certainly share that with you. Should we send that to both of you? What's the best contact?
Yeah, I mean, if you could send it to both of us, that would be great. You have both of our contact information, I believe, correct?
I do, yes.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could send it to both of us.
We'll send it to both of you, and then we'll also send out, so we'll type up the answers to the questions that people asked today, and we'll send that to you just so you can take a look to make sure we accurately typed up what you said, and then we'll send this out to everyone who participated. And if folks do, if you have questions later on that come up, could they reach out to you? Should they call the general RTB line? Are people answering the general phone line now? Yes.
Yeah, we have, well, we have everybody here working. And because we don't have a lot of front end traffic right now, we have a lot of people on the phone, so there shouldn't be much of a wait right now. But you can also email me directly. It's Michelle Reynolds who's speaking.